In the previous lesson, we told the story how the Alter Rebbe, 2 months after he got married, became famous in the non-Jewish circles, in the higher class of the non-Jewish circles. And this was because of an incident that happened. There was a nobleman who had in his courtyard a sundial, a sun clock. And every day, for 3 hours, the sun clock stopped working. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it stopped working. And 5 o'clock, it started working again. This was going on for over 2 years. He brought down the greatest minds, the biggest scientists and professors to investigate, but nobody could solve the mystery. And when he heard about Rebbe Leib Segel, that he now has a son-in-law who was young but brilliant, he asked him to come down to suggest what can be done. The Alter Rebbe gave him a suggestion. But there was a professor by the name of Marseille, who was the head of the university that belonged to this nobleman, and the professor, being an anti-Semite, rejected totally what the Alter Rebbe said and just laughed it off. When Rebbe Leib Segel came back home, he was very upset about the nasty remarks that this professor made and how he totally laughed off the Alter Rebbe's answer. And he was trying to think of a way to convince the nobleman to follow through with the Alter Rebbe's suggestion. And he consulted some of his non-Jewish acquaintances. They said that they themselves would try to follow through with it. The Alter Rebbe's advice was that there's probably a mountain 10 or 15 miles away from where the nobleman lives, and on top of the mountain there must be trees. And probably 2 years ago, those trees grew to the point that they blocked the sunlight. And 5 o'clock, when the sun is in a different position, the trees are no longer in the path of the sun rays, and they don't block them. So these people themselves traveled to that direction to see if there is indeed such a tree on top of a mountain. And sure enough, they found it. Then they decided not to tell anyone, not even Rebbe Leib Segel. They hired people, and they actually cut down the trees that were on top of this mountain. Sure enough, a few days passed, and there is excitement in the whole area because the sundial of this nobleman started to work again. And just as mysterious as it was when it stopped working, that's how mysteriously it started working again. Nobody knew the reason. When they heard that the sundial actually started working again, they brought with them the people from that village, which is near the mountain. They brought them to the nobleman. And these people testified that they cut the trees down, and they brought with them a certificate, which was actually signed by the authorities of the area, that they gave them the permission to cut these trees down on top of that mountain. And then the Alter Rebbe's name became famous, and people had tremendous respect for him, seeing how much more brilliant he was than all the scientists and all the professors and all the brilliant people that looked into this problem. At that time, there was another incident that happened. As a result of this, there was another professor, his name was Dalanji. He was one of the oldest professors of that time, and he heard about the Alter Rebbe's wisdom, especially in the field of engineering and astronomy. And when he heard this story of how the Alter Rebbe solved this problem, it encouraged him very much to go with the Alter Rebbe to the Alter Rebbe with another problem. When he was yet a student himself, he heard from a professor who was a professor in mathematics and engineering, a riddle. And it was something which nobody knew the answer to. And every time he would meet with scientists in that field, he would show them this riddle, as it was written down from then, and nobody knew the answer, how to solve it. So when he heard about the Alter Rebbe, he decided he wants to travel personally to the Alter Rebbe and see if he can solve this riddle. Naturally, when this professor, who was an old and respected professor, came, it had a tremendous impression on all the people there. So all the professors and scientists of the university of this nobleman, Shektinsky, came out to greet him and meet him. At this point, the visiting professor, this old professor, Dalanji, told them why he came. That he has this riddle, and for many years he has so many brilliant people to solve it for them. In fact, the head of this university, the Professor Massey, was one of the people that was once asked, and nobody knew the answer. And now that he heard that this brilliant son-in-law of Rabbi Yehuda Leib Segel, he's coming here specifically to ask him this question. Professor Massey got very upset, and he said to him, what you're doing is actually an insult to the scientists. You, such an old, respected professor, is actually making a trip to come and learn from this young Jew who all he knows, and whatever he knows, is only from the Talmud. Balanji, knowing that this Professor Massey is an anti-Semite, disregarded what he said and didn't even answer him. He then sent a messenger to Rabbi Yehuda Leib Segel to let him know that the Professor Dalanji came specifically to meet with his son-in-law, and he has a question to ask him, and he'd like to know when the Alter Rebbe could receive him. The Alter Rebbe answered he doesn't have to bother coming to him, he'll go to the professor. The professor presented the question to the Alter Rebbe, and after the Alter Rebbe took this with him, he had it on a piece of paper, he came back 3 days later, and the Alter Rebbe told him the solution to this question. When this professor saw how the Alter Rebbe solved this riddle, it had a tremendous, tremendous impact and tremendous impression on the professor. And wherever he went, wherever he spoke to, all the scientists and all the secular, educated people that he met, he told them about the greatness of the Alter Rebbe. And this later had an effect and brought benefit when the Alter Rebbe did his different things, that the people and the government respected him on account of all these stories that were told about him. The Rebbe writes in Hayom Yom that when the Alter Rebbe was 9 years old, he already mastered engineering and astronomy. When he was 10 years old, he made a calendar for the next 15 years. In other words, he calculated all the details about the dates, how it's going to be set up for the next 15 years. When the Alter Rebbe was 12 years old, he gave a shiur, a Torah lecture, in the laws of Kiddush HaChodesh, identifying the new moon as it is in the Rambam, and the Geonim, the Torah geniuses that were listening to this shiur, were literally stunned by the Alter Rebbe's vast knowledge in this subject of Torah. Because it's a subject of Torah that even the older Torah scholars, and the average, are unfamiliar with it. And here the Alter Rebbe, only 12 years old. For a period of 2 years, the Alter Rebbe learned with his uncle Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. He learned Chassidus, and he learned of how to daven according to Chassidus. His uncle Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak never told the Alter Rebbe that he personally is a follower of the Baal Shem Tov and of the Mezeritch. He just briefly told him about Chassidus, that the Baal Shem Tov was the one that established and taught the world Chassidus, and that the Maggid was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov. And this was according to the instructions of the Baal Shem Tov, that he wasn't allowed to tell this to the Alter Rebbe, because he said the Alter Rebbe has to arrive to the Mezeritch Maggid on his own, with his own understanding and his own decision-making. During this time, the Alter Rebbe's knowledge of Torah reached its level of completion. The Alter Rebbe was full of knowledge in Shas, Bavli, Yerushalmi, all the Svarim of Kabbalah, all the Svarim of Torah philosophy, and the Svarim of Drush. The Alter Rebbe learned in depth the Svarim of Drush of the Ramah, the Maral Prague, and the Shalah HaKodesh. And during these years, this was before the Alter Rebbe yet came to Mezeritch Maggid, this was the time that the seeds were planted in the Alter Rebbe's mind of what later became the way of Chassidus Chabad. Alter Rebbe gathered together young men who were great Torah scholars, young men who were brilliant people, and he used to learn with them Nigla, and he used to learn with them Kabbalah, and they would conduct themselves according to the Shalah. During this time that the Alter Rebbe was in the house of his father-in-law, the problem came up between the Alter Rebbe and his father-in-law. Although his father-in-law, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Segel, saw that the Alter Rebbe achieved such greatness in Torah study, at the age of 18, the Alter Rebbe already completed the entire Shas, with all the Netzah Kelim, with all the Mefarshim and commentaries, the Rishonim and the Achreinim, the early commentaries and the later commentaries. There was no Sefer the Alter Rebbe did not know. But the Alter Rebbe spent a lot of time learning Kabbalah, conducting himself according to the Shalah, spent a lot of time on davening, and this was very different and very strange to his father-in-law. It was so strange to the point that his father-in-law decided there's actually something wrong with the Alter Rebbe. Which, this is similar to what we find in the Gemara, and the Friedrich Rebbe said this in his famous Maimer Basar Legani. And the Rebbe spoke about this all the time also in regarding this Maimer Basar Legani, that sometimes great tzaddikim, who are so great that other people can't understand them, they conduct themselves in such a way that the other people who are so far and distant from their level, they misinterpret what they're doing in a negative way. The example that's given is in the Gemara. There was a great Tana by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilah, and at the weddings he used to dance. He himself would take hadassim and juggle them, and he would dance in order to bring joy to the chassan and kala. And the other Rabbanim felt that this was so inappropriate, they actually were embarrassed at him. They thought that he's acting silly. But when he passed away, and during his levaya, during his funeral, a pillar of fire came down, and that pillar stood there and made a separation between him and everyone else. And that is something which is very unusual. In fact, it happens maybe either to the greatest person of the generation or to the two greatest people of the generation. So when this happened, they realized that it was much greater than they thought. And then they said, in fact, his dancing and juggling these hadassim, the twigs, at the wedding to bring joy to the chassan and kala, that is where we actually see now his greatness. So this was something which he did, and because he was so great, other people interpreted it as silliness, as nonsense. Shtus the kedusha. And we find many other stories like this. In fact, in the Sefer Ne'im Melech, it says that many times a tzaddik, because of his greatness, other people look at what he's doing as if there's something wrong with him, and he gives the example of David HaMelech. How it says that David HaMelech, when he was receiving the Aron and the Luchas, he was dancing and singing so much that people were embarrassed by that. And in fact, that is one of the reasons why they have opponents, because they don't understand what they're doing and they misinterpret it. And that's what happened to the Alter Rebbe. And the opposition of his family was so strong that they actually tried everything they possibly can that the Alter Rebbe's wife, Rebbe Tzimshterna, should demand to get divorced. She wouldn't hear of it. And when they saw that there's no way they convinced her to get divorced, they started to cause all sorts of problems to the Alter Rebbe and to his wife. And they suffered terribly under their hands. And they were doing all this to force them to get divorced. There were times where they took away all the candles from the Alter Rebbe, and he had to learn at night in the light of the moon. There were times where they took away all the firewood from the Alter Rebbe, and the winter nights were freezing. There were times they took away all the food from them. But all of this did not help. They weren't able to budge the Alter Rebbe one bit, and he continued his avodah the way he davened and learned as before. And they also had no effect on the Rebbetzin. She continued to be totally loyal to the Alter Rebbe and not even to think, chas v'shalom, of getting divorced from the Alter Rebbe. The stories are told of certain things that happened during that time period. There's one story that's told where the Alter Rebbe's father-in-law, the Yehuda Leib Segel, was once in the house, and the Alter Rebbe used to daven in the attic. He was very much against the fact that Alter Rebbe davened so long. One time he heard suddenly a loud bang. It sounded like somebody fell. And everybody in the house ran upstairs to the attic. And there they saw the Alter Rebbe lying on the floor, in his talus and film. He was as white as could be, absolutely no movement, and they looked at him and they were convinced that he's no longer alive. The Rebbetzin, however, knew his greatness. She walked over, touched his beged, his garment, and he immediately woke up. His face was flaming red. He asked everyone to leave the room, and he continued to daven. When his father-in-law saw this, it had some effect on him, but he still didn't stop causing all the tzaras to the Alter Rebbe. Another incident which once happened was that on Shabbos, he locked up all the vessels of the house, all the food, all the drinks. So Alter Rebbe should not be able to make kiddush and not be able to eat anything. And maybe he'll learn not to daven so long on Shabbos. But the Alter Rebbe continued davening as he always did. And when he finished davening, he found just a small candle burning. And there was his wife, the Rebbetzin, sitting and crying. Together they searched through the house. This was Friday night. And all they could find was a barrel of whiskey that they forgot to lock up, and a wooden bowl. What did the Alter Rebbe do? He took the whiskey, poured it into the wooden bowl, and he made kiddush on the wooden bowl as if this would be a becha. The next day, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Segel said to his daughter, "So what did the Alter Rebbe do last night? Did he make kiddush?" She said, "Yeah, we found whiskey, and he made kiddush on the whiskey." So he started to laugh, and he said, "Probably he got drunk, and then he slept." He said, "No. After that, he sat down, and he was learning all night long." This still had an effect on his father. When he saw the Alter Rebbe is an unusual person, but nevertheless, it still didn't have the effect to the point that he changed his attitude towards the Alter Rebbe. Later, when the Alter Rebbe became known in the world and his greatness became known, his father-in-law was no longer alive. However, the Alter Rebbe's mother-in-law was still alive. Her name was Bela. She was very wealthy, and she begged them to come live in her house, and she would provide them with all their needs. The Alter Rebbe rejected the offer, and he didn't want to go back. And he gave the following analogy. He said, a baby, before the baby is born, it's inside the mother, learning the entire Torah, and everything is just great for that baby. When the baby is born, comes along a malach, and makes the baby forget all the Torah that it learned. But nevertheless, if someone would later come along to the baby and say, after the full-grown child, "Do you want to go back to where you were before?" he'll surely say no. Alter Rebbe was implying that being in his mother-in-law's house, this is where he was in the past. That was a certain stage in life in the beginning. But now, that's not the time to go back. Now is the time for the Alter Rebbe to be out and to teach Chassidus to the world. Everything we've related until this point is about the Alter Rebbe's birth, Alter Rebbe's childhood, about the Alter Rebbe's marriage, and what went on in the home of his father-in-law and during that time period. And now we'll discuss the time that the Alter Rebbe traveled to Mezeritch and became a Talmud, a student of the Mezeritch Maggid. It was in the year Tov Kuf Chov Daled, 1764. During the summer of that year, the Alter Rebbe was almost 19 years old. And he made a decision, together with his wife, the Rebbetzin Sterner, that it's now time for him to travel to another city to study Torah. And that was the custom in those days, that young men would get married at an early age, and then later they would leave for a year or two to study Torah. At that time, the Alter Rebbe said he had to make a decision where should he go study. He couldn't make a decision, so he consulted his brother, Rabbi Yehuda Leib, the Maril. And Rabbi Yehuda Leib urged him to go to the city of Mezeritch. At that time, there were two Torah centers in the world. One was in the city of Vilna, and the other was the city of Mezeritch. Vilna was the place where the Vilna Gaon lived. He was considered the greatest Torah scholar and the leader in the Misnagdisha circles, the non-Hasidic circles. And Mezeritch was the city where the Mezeritch Maggid lived, and he was the head and the leader of the Hasidic movement. The Alter Rebbe said the following: I heard that Vilna is a place where they teach you how to learn. Mezeritch is a place where they teach you how to daven. Learning, I know a little bit, but davening, special training in how to daven, that I haven't had. So let me go to Mezeritch and find out what that's all about. And that's what attracted him to go to Mezeritch. From this, we also see an interesting thing, that the Alter Rebbe, if we put into one word, what is Chassidus all about, what is Mezeritch all about, the Alter Rebbe describes it as a place where you learn how to daven. When it comes to the question of what is Chassidus, there's so many different ways of answering, but one of the things we see in this story is that Chassidus is davening, a special way in serving Hashem through davening. And this really coincides with the name Chassid. One of the reasons why Chassidim were called Chassidim is because it says in the Gemara Brachas that there were people who were called Chassidim Harishonim, the early Chassidim. What was so unique about these people? They excelled in their davening. They used to spend 9 hours a day for davening, because they prepared themselves an hour before the davening. The davening itself took an hour, and then after the davening, there was another hour for them to collect themselves from their davening. So being that they davened 3 times a day, and each davening lasted altogether 3 hours, so therefore it means they spent 9 hours a day on davening. In fact, the Gemara asks, if they spent so much time on davening, when do they have time for Torah study and to acquire their Torah knowledge? And the Gemara answers, because they were Chassidim, because they were so righteous and so God-fearing, and they spent so much time on davening, Hashem provided them with a special blessing, a special bracha in their Torah study, that they, with a little bit of time, should be able to accomplish what others accomplished in much more time. So for this we also see how the name Chassid is connected primarily with the exceptional approach in davening. And this coincides with what the Alter Rebbe said, that when he was thinking of going to Mezeritch, he said, this is a place where they teach you how to daven. The time that the Alter Rebbe went was Tov Kuf Chov Daled, which is 1764. The Alter Rebbe was 19 years old, and this was in the summertime of that year. And he went with the blessing of his wife, the Rebbe Sterner. However, Alter Rebbe committed himself that he won't go for longer than a year and a half. He'll be back. The Rebbetzin made an effort to get 30 ruble together, and with this money she bought the Alter Rebbe a horse and a wagon, and together with his younger brother of Yehuda Leib, the Maril, they traveled to the city of Mezeritch. When they came to Orsha, on the way to Mezeritch, the horse died. The Alter Rebbe said that this is a sign from heaven that there's something wrong. And he said what it is that his brother, the Maril, didn't really get permission from his wife for this journey. And therefore he should really go back home. The Alter Rebbe said to him, you go back home, I'll continue the journey, but I'll share with you everything that I will require in Mezeritch. So from this point on, Alter Rebbe no longer had the horse, so he just went by foot to Mezeritch. And the Alter Rebbe said that when he came to the Maggid of Mezeritch, he saw the Maggid himself and the students of the Maggid, that most of the day and the night they were engaged in Avodah Shebelev, in davening, in the preparation for the davening itself, and after the davening, he saw them preparing for Kriyash Meshalamita, the reciting of Shema before going to bed, and he saw how they spent a lot of time, many hours a day, primarily on davening, serving Hashem through that way. Alter Rebbe himself was not really used to this, because Alter Rebbe devoted himself and dedicated himself to acquire as much Torah knowledge as possible. And Alter Rebbe spent a lot of hours learning and just acquiring more and more Torah knowledge. So although when he observed the way the Maggid and his Talmidim davened, Alter Rebbe was fascinated and very inspired by their davening, but nevertheless he made a decision that he's going back home and he's going to continue his way of just acquiring more knowledge in Nigla and in Nister as much as possible. After he left, he suddenly reminded himself there's something he forgot in the shul. So he went back to the shul of the Maggid to get what he forgot. As he walked to the shul, we see that the Maggid is engaged in answering a Torah question. Someone came to him with a question about the lung of an animal to know whether it's kosher or not. And the Alter Rebbe heard the way the Maggid was dealing with this question. And he saw the depth and the breadth and the vast knowledge that the Maggid had in Nigla, the revealed part of Torah. It had such an impression on him that he made the decision he's going to remain here in Mezeritch. At this point, the Mezeritch Maggid revealed to the Alter Rebbe that the Baal Shem Tov had already revealed to him. And the Baal Shem Tov told it to him in the name of his Rebbe, Achia Shiloini, that very soon the son of Reb Baruch, the Tzaddik Nister, the hidden Tzaddik, will come to you. His name is Reb Shneur Zalman. He has a neshama chadasha, a new neshama, and after he comes to you, he's going to leave. But then he's going to return. And when he returns, he'll make a decision to stay with you. At this point, you should reveal to him the special neshama that he has, and his unique mission to reveal the path of Chassidus Chabad in the world, although it'll be very difficult, and he'll have to put his life in danger to carry through this mission, but Achrischa Tizgeh Ma'od. Ultimately, you'll achieve the greatest things. And the Baal Shem Tov said that my Rebbe, Achia Shiloini, and myself, we will be there to evoke Rachem Shamayim, the mercy of Hashem, on the Alter Rebbe and all those that follow him for all generations to come until Mashiach will come. When the Alter Rebbe heard this, he was overcome with such fear, with such awe, and he began to cry. Hearing what the Maggid told him about his holy and special mission. This was the beginning of the Alter Rebbe's connection to the Mezeritch Maggid. It's interesting to note that we see repeated again and again this promise to the Alter Rebbe that his path will be there, Yidden will follow this path until Mashiach comes. The Baal Shem Tov said this on the Alter Rebbe's 3rd birthday. He said the Alter Rebbe is like Avraham Avinu. He will have Mesiras Nefesh to Chassidus, but he will succeed and he will be followed until Mashiach comes. Again, in the dream the Alter Rebbe had, where Rashi, the Even Ezra, and the Ramban requested of him not to publish his commentary, they also blessed him that his path in serving Hashem will be followed for the generations to come until Mashiach comes. And here again, the Mezeritch Maggid tells the Alter Rebbe, at the first time that they meet, that he's telling him this in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, who is saying this in the name of Achia Shaleni, that although the Alter Rebbe's mission is a very difficult one and will involve a lot of danger, nevertheless he will succeed, and he will succeed and will be followed until Mashiach comes.